Morning, everybody. Welcome to Sales Chatter. It's our favorite day of the week. We got our main man, Principal and Analyst, Dean Croke, here with us from DAT. And then we got Jeff Dickinson, President and CEO of RGTX Logistics Solutions. We're going to get into data. We're going to get into everything that this week has been. First and foremost, before we get started, I want to thank Ken Adamo for filling in for Dean last week. It was amazing to kind of see the knowledge that he shared, and I know a lot of people got value out of it. So with that being said, let's get started and let's get right into it.
Yes.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
Always gotta love that intro. Good morning, gents. So happy to have you both on this morning again. Let's get into it. I know, like we said, Dean, Ken filled in for last week. I know you have a little funny, well, not necessarily a funny story, but last week was definitely an adventure for everybody traveling across the United States. So, can you tell us a little bit more what happened?
Yeah, I was in Atlanta with our partner OTR Solutions, and I was seeing these alerts pop up on my Twitter feed, and I thought, oh, this can't be good if the FAA is sending out they're grounding flights nationally, reminiscent of what they did on 9/11.
Yep.
And it turns out there was a software upgrade went awry and planes were grounded overnight. But being in Atlanta is one of those unique airports where there's no backup airport. Like you've got Midway in Chicago, Dallas has got other. It was just nothing left but chaos. And I thought at about 10 in the morning, and of course I don't need any excuse to get in a car and drive on a highway. And so I just thought a late evening flight, by the time they get everything cleared in Atlanta, it'll be too late. And I could probably beat the plane home anyway, which of course I didn't. I did beat it by about 4 hours, but it's only like a 16 and a half hour drive. So it was like, that's a normal day's work in Australia if you're a road train driver. So I always think if I'm within 15, 16 hours of home, I'm in a car and I'm driving. But the thing that struck me was just the traffic and the construction. And I could, it took me a lot longer than 16 and a half hours. So I was a bit naive. I'd forgotten about construction and the infrastructure bill and all of the good things that's being done on our highways. It took me 2 hours extra to get out of Georgia on I-85. And I took some pictures of the traffic, and the volume of trucks on that highway is staggering, but just the backup, like for miles and miles and miles. And I kept thinking all the way up through South Carolina, North Carolina, even up into Jeff's area, up in Jersey.
Yep.
The impact on capacity must be substantial, because if we didn't have roadworks, we'd have a lot more trucks on the roads. So in some ways, for carriers, it's a good thing that they've got delays. Otherwise, we'd have much lower rates, I suspect. But my overarching, and you saw the post I did on LinkedIn, Jeff, my priority was to get through New York City before sunup. So I was pushing myself through some of those, dark hours in the middle of the night, because I knew it could be 24 hours before I'm home if I got caught in Fort Lee trying to get up onto the George Washington Bridge.
Oh, yeah. For I-95 there? Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely all the way. So you took I-85 over to 95 and straight up, right?
Yeah. Because I knew at that time of the night I'd have a pretty good run. It was wet and rainy, but a lot of truck traffic. But as you saw in my LinkedIn post, I had a 20-minute nap, and I was just sort of getting out, stretched my leg. And I thought, oh, gee, the highway's quiet, up sort of in the Connecticut border. Yeah. And then it's like someone opened the gate, and suddenly there was this stampede of trucks. And I'm not joking. It was like the police had a rolling roadblock and suddenly let it loose. And I sat there and watched it while I drank my coffee for about half an hour, and I was just blown away. A lot of people I know getting out of New York City to get into Boston, trying to avoid the traffic in Hartford, which is another big bottleneck area.
Oh, you went 91 then, right?
Yeah, I went up 91 to 84. So I usually run up through 84. It's a much better way into Boston.
Yep.
So, so that was an adventurous trip. But talking to some truck drivers at truck stops, you get out there and you get a good dose of sleep deprivation. You tend to get soft after a while, and you think about how things are really, but they're always much worse than what you think. And the traffic was much worse than what I thought. The other thing though that was interesting was how bad drivers had got. I know we've talked about this on the show, but not car drivers, truck drivers. They were noticeably worse. And again, this is a small data point of one trip, right? So take it with a grain of salt. But just I don't usually see other truck drivers being really aggressive towards other truck drivers, cutting them off, but I see the one thing I do see is when you've got roadworks and construction and you've got 3 lanes down into 2 into 1, most people pull up and get in line, right? But there's always these cars that want to shoot up the right. Well, not just cars, trucks flying up the outside and just forcing their way over on top of cars. And I thought, wow, this is, and the name of the fleet's on the side. I thought this is such a bad look for the industry. So that was one of the things that kind of stood out to me. Was
that near Newark or was that down south? Like in Carolina?
No, it was further south. That was in North Carolina.
Yeah,
but these were long haul truckers. These weren't regional guys. You could see all the regional, heavy haulers and flatbed and dedicated guys running with day cabs and some sleepers. But the long haul guys that you can see that run 48 states or multiple states, you could see the pressure, like the ELDs and the pressure to get as many miles as they can done before they run out of hours. You could just see it driving people towards all of these risky behaviors. So that was sort of one of the standouts from the trip. But it was good to be home, and it took about a 24-hour period to get my sleep back to normal, which is good. So,
but I'll tell you, I really thought you were going to say a lot of those erratic truck drivers were around Port New York City. Because the old saying, if you can drive in New York City, you can drive anywhere in the country. And that's where you see a lot of irritated truck drivers, because those New York and New Jersey car drivers, they cut off trucks all the time. I see it all the time. It's crazy.
The thing that was interesting was coming up onto the George Washington Bridge, the toll booths are still there, even though they're electronic now.
Yep.
But they're so narrow. I'm surprised there aren't more wrecks. Like I could barely get my truck through it. My eyesight's not as good as it used to be. I have to really go slow. But there were some guys absolutely hammering through that toll area eastbound onto the bridge, and I thought someone's going to take that thing out one day. Probably a good thing.
Especially if you're going out to Long Island, you're going over the Frog's Neck and the Whitestone Bridge, and going to one of our favorite parkways, Dean, the Long Island Expressway. There's nothing express about that. It's the world's largest parking lot, as we named it. And I'll tell you, if you don't get through there at a certain time of the day, you are stuck there for hours on end.
I guess, bringing it back to transport and logistics, it struck me that this is why fleets pay drivers a premium to run into the Northeast. Some drivers just flat out refuse, but a lot of people have to pay an extra amount per mile to run to the Northeast because of the traffic. Your productivity goes down. As I said in my post, not all miles and hours are created equal, because when you get north of your area, Jeff, everything slows down. It just takes a lot longer.
It's funny. I will not name the carrier, but there was this route designer a long time ago that said the optimal time to go into New York City was at 6 a.m. in the morning. And I started laughing. He never put in tolls, didn't add that into the cost of out here. They don't know. A lot of these dispatchers who are new in the role don't know all the bridges and the accessorial charges. And I said to him, and I was very blunt and naive at that time, I said, I'll tell you what, I'll pay for your flight to come out here. We'll spend the whole week. We'll go into the city at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m. You tell me which is the best time to go into New York City, because at that time, and I still think they have it enforced, that you can only make right-hand turns. You can't go in there with the 53-footer with a plate on it. Nevertheless, and it was an eye opener. You think a lot of dispatchers know the area, they don't.
Jeff, in my car trip, it was $74 in tolls from Atlanta to Boston, and then I thought, well, what does it cost to go over in a truck across the GWB? I think it's 3 figures. I think it was $120 last time I did it.
It's more. I mean, I know a company that only uses power only, and they give them a flat rate, I think $3 a mile or something like that, and then they pop on like $190 on top of that for bridges and tolls. It's very, very interesting. They just
Yeah.
it's highway robbery.
Yeah.
It really is.
Literally.
Well, the other data point, and this is sort of, we can get into some of the market data, Ryan, the other data point that struck me about why people are, rushing. This week will be the third 4-day week out of 4.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So if you think about from a carrier's perspective, not just shipping and broking, right? Short work weeks are challenging because you lose volume, you lose revenue. But for a carrier who's thinking 5-6 day weeks, being under load for long periods of time. A friend of mine was in Valdosta loading produce last week. The spot rate was $3,900. He was being offered $2,300. It's $1,000 in fuel, a couple of $100 in tolls. Worst part was the load was going to sit on the truck for 3 days. And he said, I can't make money at this. He said, lucky I had a good December, but their concern was that with the short work weeks, you've had 3 in a row. Well, not 3 in a row. You had 2, then 1 off, and then this week is a short work week. Carriers are really looking for miles, which of course, in the broking world, that could mean opportunity for some margin expansion. But this is a rough start of the year from a productivity perspective. But we saw last week, from a data point, we saw, and I'd been watching this on social media, my ever reliable source of information, through Instagram and TikTok. You always learn a lot what's going on in the market. When you start seeing guys posting pictures of cocktails on a beach, they're not driving. And if you follow them over a long period of time, I've been following some of these guys for years, and there's a few that I watch closely. They were back at work last week, so they weren't on the beach, which they were the previous week. And what we saw, though, in our spot market was a 60% week over week increase in the number of carriers posting their equipment looking for loads. Wow. That's a big increase. So, and the problem is that load post volumes are up, but of course that was shippers getting ahead of the short work week this week. The problem is we've still got a lot more trucks. So the volume of loads being posted in the spot market was within 1% of last year. So we're still seeing really solid volumes to start the year. The problem is, though, we've got the highest level of capacity looking for loads in 7 years, even higher than 2021 at this point in time. So there's still a lot of trucks in the market looking for work. More so in refrigerated, but there's definitely, I think, there's still a very healthy spot market for dry vans, but we've still got a lot of capacity in the market, and that's sort of for carriers. That's why they're struggling, and it's also the same for reefer carriers. Produce volumes are down to the lowest level since 2016. When you look at the number of weekly truckloads of produce, really, really bad. But that's being driven by California, which is having that abnormal flooding event. Volumes there, I looked at it yesterday, the lowest weekly truckload volumes last week since 2010, about 70% fewer truckloads coming out of there this week. So I think reefer carriers are in for a tough go at it in the next few months because of the problems in California. Produce season really doesn't get going nationally until April, but I think some of those California volumes are really going to affect some of the carriers. And of course, flatbed, volumes of load posts in the flatbed market are about 70% lower than this time last year. No surprise, the weakest in 7 years in the flatbed spot market. And of course, you've only got to look at housing numbers and steel production numbers to see why volumes are so low. So flatbed carriers, way more trucks than loads. The volume of carriers looking for loads is the highest in 7 years. So not a great start for carriers to the year. I guess for brokers, it's been a disrupted start too because you've got short work weeks. But there's still a lot of capacity in the market. Still too early to see if my hot take from 2 weeks ago was right, that the market had bottomed in terms of spot rates. Diesel prices will be the big determinant there, but we're still seeing rates hold. I think the national average last week held at $1.93, which is not too bad. It's 24 cents a mile higher than the last 5 pre-pandemic years for week 2. So spot rates nationally are holding higher. The top 50 lanes are about $2.22 a mile. So still pretty healthy numbers there when you think about the national average spot rate. Operating costs with diesel, where it is today, are up around $1.95. So carriers, by and large, are in the ballpark of what it costs break even to run a long haul truck for week 2 of the year. But this is a quieter time of the year, as you know, and of course we've got that big black cloud of recessionary talks hanging over everyone's head. Lots of doom and gloom talk there, but so far flatbed volume, just general flatbed, dry van and reefer volumes are holding steady. Jason Miller had a post out today. I haven't seen his December numbers on the Michigan State University truckload ton mile index, but they ended the year relatively flat, which is, for that to happen in this year, I think is a really good outcome for us. But also we're off to a good start this year if you're thinking about spot market activity so far based on load post so far this year.
Something, one thing that stood out, and you're absolutely right about the beginning of the year and those drivers looking for 5 and 6 day loads constantly all the time, and you're working those 3-day or 4-day work weeks. One of the things that stick out a lot to me is the shipments that need geofencing. They're high risk and everything. Now you're increasing the high probability of theft. Because your trailer can't go out of route, so you're not going to go home. Right, you're in that geo-fenced area, and of course, all the bells and whistles go out as soon as you go off off route. But I wonder if at that time of year, over those 2-week periods, did pilfering rise on those shipments because of that?
It typically does. I wrote an article, a blog post, and again, the stats escape me, but it was an article I interviewed the head of cargo claims and underwriting at Travelers Insurance, and they do some work with a various analytics company called CargoNet, and of course it doesn't capture every single bit of pilferage. It captures the major thefts. But it's no coincidence. It's the big theft areas where there are big populations of people to move things quickly. So your area is a hotspot. Yeah.
Jersey is one of them. And one thing too, I would think that dispatchers proactively, as well as salespeople, would inform their shippers and saying, "Hey, listen, due to a long weekend, could you push off this shipment, until after the kind of holiday, instead of shipping it on a Friday and having it sit for 4 days? How about move it on a Tuesday instead? And here's the reason why: you're going into a high theft area. We can't guarantee that your shipment's going to sit in a secured yard with cameras and all that." I mean, those are type of things that dispatchers, sales guys should be always informed on what's going on and the high probability of this actually happening. So
I wrote an article it's a blog post on dat.com on November the 22nd, if anybody wanted to read about this. But Jeff, the interesting thing, of course, you've got all the holiday hotspots, right, where drivers park trailers, right? So a lot of the high value cargo is going to have telematics devices. The thing that was interesting when I talked to Scott Cornell at Travelers, even though you've got telematics on the device, it's not that hard to disable it completely. If you take the whole load. So the thieves have become very good at disabling the telematics data. Plus, if they take the trailer and truck, they're out from under that trailer pretty quickly with their own assets to pull that load somewhere else. One of the things that they did was survey where cargo gets stolen the most. Just under half of it is en route to a distribution center from a store. From DCs to stores, right? And one of the things that Travelers recommended people do is that they set up red zones, right? So they geofence what Jeff's talking about, which is a red zone, which is a known hotspot for trailer theft. And they'll geofence. They'll know when the trailers break a geofence. But what they say that the most vulnerable point is when a carrier loads at a DC and then goes to a truck stop to fuel and shower.
Exactly.
That's where the thefts are occurring. Yes. So what they do is they work with their carriers coming up to the breaks, and they say, let's reverse the logic there. Let's get ready and pre-tripped before you go into load and then hit the road and go, because that's where you're most vulnerable to have the assets stolen. But it's a seasonal.
I used to say, Dean, to the shippers, and the carriers, I would have a list and saying, okay, here's the requirements. You can't stop within 250 miles. You must have a full tank of gas. Even put a warlock on the back of the doors. But they know how to break into them. I'm sure you know that as well. But we try to take all those measurements, and that's why it's good to talk about this when our next holiday comes up. those are the type of things that you should really start thinking about. And you mentioned that pre-trip. Well, that's part of telling the dispatcher what you need that carrier to do. So
hot areas. Again, of course, travelers. The high volume things that get stolen are what people want to buy the most. So at Christmas time, it could have been game consoles, right? So, but hot areas are California, Texas, Florida, Georgia, New Jersey, inland ports such as Chicago, Memphis. Again, all have big truck terminals, large rail yards close to populations connected to arterial highways, enabling the rapid movement of stolen goods. So, but what they did notice in the report was that carriers, a lot of the thefts, normally occur within, that 250-mile radius of where they're picked up. What they did notice was over the last few months of last year, loads were being followed into neighboring states. So the thieves are getting more sophisticated. So even though telematics and technology's got more sophisticated, of course, so have the bad guys at figuring out where carriers.
A lot of inside jobs too. They tell them what trailer it's on, the value of it. Here's the lane that they're going on. Here's the routing, and they wait for that opportune opportunity to strike, and they're in and out in a few minutes. They really know what they're doing.
Yeah, I've had it happen to myself on a loading dock, where they call and say, "Hey, we want to rob you tonight." So my response was not suitable for public consumption, but this was a load of and I think we might have talked about this, 1986. So it was VHS players. In 1986, VHS play was about a $2 million load in today's dollars. And this was an organized gang from across the Pacific Ocean in Australia. And they were loading the trailer through the side door of my reefer van. And I got a phone call from a friend who was part of it. It shocked me that he was involved in it. And he said, they want to rob you tonight and steal the load and shoot your tires out, make it look like, we'll tie you up and make it look like you kind of resisted a little bit. And I said, no, I don't think that's happening tonight, because I was a driver for an owner operator. And I said, no, that's not happening. So
that's pretty bold.
They were easy to spot. I could see them coming at 2 a.m. They just somehow they ran out of road. I don't know what happened. They kind of disappeared. That was it.
It's crazy to kind of think about, even for us here in our neighborhood, a lot of cars, especially like if you got a pickup truck, they know, like the people have the video, like we have like our neighborhood group chat, and you can see those videos, man. It's crazy. They come in, boom. Yeah. Even my wife and I, like we keep our keys upstairs now. We don't keep our keys at the front door. We got the blockers and things like that. And when we're kind of coming, I like what Jeff kind of said, like we're looking at holidays, so you're being prepared, and we've been talking with our themes and so on. Even look at Chinese New Year that's coming up on this Sunday. It's going to be, it might be a 3-day work week for some people, so I know I sent out a bunch of prospecting emails today after our episode, and everyone's on vacation till next month. I would say maybe out of the 10 emails I sent, I got about 7 saying, hey, we're out till really February. So really? In that mindset, as you're kind of saying that projections are up a little bit high, I saw something on the show today, if you can kind of talk a little bit more, was that something about the rates or like the spot market looking, I think 3% within 2018's numbers.
Yeah, I've got that from our report on the show. The dry van rate was about the number was in the dry van sector, it was about down 2 cents. So it's 30% lower than this time last year at $1.93. Ryan, just 4 cents per mile lower than 2018 was the number we talked about on the dry van side. Reefer rates are about 17 cents a mile lower. Flatbed is 4 cents per mile higher than this time in 2018. So as we talked about on the show before, we're within the ballpark of 2018 rates, which was again primarily a flatbed rate driven rally. But when you look at our data, it really didn't take off until the middle of February, and then it sort of rallied all the way through to July. So there was a lull, and flatbed rates are kind of following that trajectory down right now, albeit very slowly, but they're tracking with 2018. It was interesting, last year's flatbed volumes tracked almost identical to 2018 levels and 2021. Last year was a very similar year to 2018 because it was a very strong industrial economy. So we're seeing, the industrial manufacturing economy is still relatively strong. So we're seeing pretty good volumes overall, even though they're way down compared to this time last year. So 2018 still looks like being a good year to compare where rates are at right now, which again wasn't a horrible year. Of course, the big difference is everyone's operating costs are much higher than when they would have been, normally.
It's crazy to think about. And just a quick comment that I just actually remembered where Jeff brought up the high risk. I was actually at a baby shower this weekend, and I was telling somebody there that I never met before what I do and things like that. And that's the first thing he actually asked. He's like, "Do you guys get a lot of thefts and things like that that kind of happens? And what do you do?" Because like he was asking during Christmas time what happens with like PS5s and like Xboxes, and it just goes to show you like that's kind of like a thought that the public has. So if the public is having that, we as a professional should be having that as well. So I just remember that. I thought I'd mention that as well.
Yeah,
well, it's also why a lot of smaller owner operators pay $200-300 a month to park their trucks in secure parking areas, because if you own a truck, you've got to pay for parking these days almost everywhere, and what comes with that is a gated, secure area with cameras. Because unfortunately,
and it's highly lit too. Because when I was moving that kind of stuff, $3 million loads, I would say, bringing in this load, I want to park next to the office. I want, I don't want the doors next to the fence. I want them outwards because they can cut through fences just like that. Plus, it gets dark over there as well. So, I wanted the lights on the back of the truck just to take those extra precautions. Is going to save you a lot of hell, boy.
And diesel theft. I mean, diesel theft's a big thing today. So, having your truck in a well-lit area. I mean, sometimes they can get in and out. What they're doing is not siphoning any out, but cutting a hole in the bottom of the tank, so it runs out quicker. So you don't have to sit there. It's not obvious. You can lay under the truck and get all the diesel out pretty quickly, or gasoline for that matter, and you don't have to worry about being visible in a truck stop. It's very, very clever.
And they're quick. I mean, look how fast they take catalytic converters off cars.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
I mean, they can literally have it cut off and out of there in about 2-3 minutes, if that. They're done. So they're quick and efficient for sure.
Yeah. The other thing, Ryan, that was interesting on our show yesterday was we had Larry Gross on, right? So one of the things we've talked about on this show is the shift in imports from the West Coast to the East Coast.
Yep.
A little bit of sense that maybe those volumes have slowed down. West Coast still has the majority of the volume, right? So Los Angeles is still the number one port. Larry made an interesting question. I asked him about that shift and did he think it'd stick? And he made a really interesting point that I hadn't considered. And he said with the shift away from China, northern China, for manufacturers, and when they go to one of the big growth areas, of course, has been Vietnam. When you go to Southeast Asian ports, they are closer to the East Coast via the Suez Canal than they are traveling east to the West Coast and then down via the Panama Canal to the East Coast. So I thought that was a really interesting point, because there's been some questions about, well, will it shift? And if they resolve the ILWU's contract negotiations on the West Coast, will shippers reroute back to the West Coast? And he said, he's not sure. He thinks a lot of it's going to stick on the East Coast. Maybe a lot of it was the wrong word. I'd have to listen to his exact words, but paraphrasing, a lot of that volume will stick on the East Coast because of the rerouting of some of the big ocean carriers through the Suez Canal. And that means that ports like Savannah, which had a record year, Brunswick, Norfolk, all those things we've talked about nearly all of last year, will be big markets or bigger markets for both non-asset and asset-based carriers all up and down the East Coast when they're thinking about capacity. So the other data point he said is that there's still a lot of containers in the US. He quoted a number of about 4 million empty containers that need to go back overseas to be loaded. He gave me a number to put that into perspective. He said that's an 8-high wall all the way along the southern border. So if you'd lined up all of the containers along the entire southern border and stacked them 8 high, that's how many empty containers there are here in the US. And what that means, of course, is for drayage operators, that they're having trouble getting in to unload because the ocean carriers are not accepting, as many empties in to get rid of them. They're only doing it maybe a 1-for-1, as a loaded one goes out, an empty one comes in. And right now you're hearing drayage carriers talk about having to, hold on to these containers longer because they can't de-hire them. And they're even being charged for these containers that the ocean carriers won't take. So really interesting discussion with Larry But certainly intermodal volumes are down last year. But when you listen to Larry talk about it, you get a sense that the supply chain issues are definitely easing, but we're not there yet. But we're definitely seeing lower port volumes allow a lot of the ocean, or a lot of the ports on our oceans on both coasts sort of catch up with lower volumes.
Yeah, one thing, you talk about the volumes of empties. At the peak, Long Beach, LA, the amount of empty TEUs that were there, to put it in perspective, they said that you can put it nose to tail, tightly fit from Long Beach all the way to Chicago. That's how many they had in there. I mean, wow. That's unbelievable when you look at that as a perspective. I don't know to be honest, I don't know how many they have there right now, but it's all about the repositioning of entities, whether they're TOFCs or COFCs, and being able to pick them up at a reduced cost. Sometimes they give you a really good rate to take those empties to get them up to Chicago, into Atlanta, or up into the Northeast, or wherever it might be, where they're short. Those are the things that you should look at as well. I mean, you used to get a lot of good rates there, but that was a big problem with the empties and the chassis. I don't even know what the chassis are. Remember, there was a huge problem with the where you had the same parts coming from overseas, just like the automobile manufacturers. And they weren't getting them. There was a lot of disruption and everything. I wonder where they are right now, as far as, were they able to fix a lot of these chassis? Where were they 3 months ago, and where are they now? I would love to find that out.
It's going to be a great thing to follow this year, because we kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Wasn't it? We sort of could have, I think I made a bold prediction that we're going to end up with a lot of chassis trailers and 53-foot boxes and 53-foot dry vans sitting around looking for stuff to haul eventually this year.
That's right. I believe you said that, I don't know, about 3 months ago or so. Yeah, you said something about that. At first we got a problem, then we have the adverse. We have a huge problem of too much equipment, not enough freight movement.
Hey, Ryan, the other data point that jumped out this week was on the show 2 weeks ago when I was on, we were talking about the floods in California. One of the things that we noted was growers were looking to Florida and Mexico to fill the shortages because of the floods on the West Coast. And as expected, volumes started to increase. So this is something that reefer carriers might want to think about. And the reason I bring it up, my friend that was trying to load from Valdosta back to Boston for half what he should have been getting, I said to him, there's pretty healthy volumes coming out of McAllen and Laredo markets right now for reefer carriers. And it is peak shipping season for avocados ahead of Super Bowl. So there's a lot of volume going to move to Phoenix in particular, where the Super Bowl is on, but also to all the big cities where it's on. So if you think about 2 weeks ago, we expected there'd be more volume across the southern border. When we looked at the USDA data last week, weekly truckload volumes across the entire southern border, when you think about it, California, Arizona, and Texas, highest in 12 years. And most of that volume coming across is through Laredo and McAllen in the Rio Grande Valley. Those volumes are up 18% year over year. Avocados specifically up 22% year over year, because California is the other market that produces avocados. So lots of good volume. Reefer loadings out of McAllen to Atlanta up 10 cents a mile to $2.71. Orlando $2.86. Even loads to Phoenix were up to $2.46, the highest in 12 months. So some good reefer rates coming out of that market there on the southern border. McAllen is geographically the closest to where all the avocados are grown in central Mexico in the volcanic region. So you'll see a lot more volume come into those markets and then head, in all directions out of there. So for carriers thinking about where is some good volumes and rates, the southern border markets in McAllen and Laredo will be pretty strong, I think, especially for, there'd be a lot of broking activity for sure. But also Yuma, Arizona, southern Arizona will be, a very strong market too, all the way through March. So some pretty good rates coming out of there. Of course, they're all relatively remote markets. You've got to get there with your assets. You've got to get trucks there at a reasonable rate. But there's pretty strong loadings going out of into those markets right now. So I don't know that carriers would have too much trouble going there. But there are a few bright spots on otherwise what's a pretty lackluster produce season.
A lot of guac for Super Bowl, and that's what we're going to see kind of happen. It's you kind of look at all these things and kind of like paramount as well. Dean, when you were on a couple of weeks ago, we're keeping our theme with prospecting. Sorry, with guys getting into the business, and you mentioned that Houston was a big zone. Is it still showing as well like Houston's being a big market right now for people to kind of go after?
Oh, absolutely. I think in the dry van market, I saw some data last week that had Houston was the only top 10 market last week. So think about DAT's spot market. The top 10 markets account for a quarter of our national volume, the top 10 markets. So 10 of 135. So it's a significant, concentration in the top 10 markets. Oh, yeah. Houston was the only one last week to post a gain out of all of our markets in the top 10. They held on to the number one spot. Houston's been the number one spot for months and months and months for dry van load post volumes. Now, normally you would think Atlanta, Illinois, Joliet, Chicago, typically 1 and 2 for the best part of 2021 and 2022 were Ontario, Los Angeles, because of all the imports.
It's booming down there. I mean, I said, back in October when I went down there, warehousing popping up all over the place down there. I mean, something's changing down there really rapidly. And what is that, 35? I think about 35, that major whatever. Trucks all over the place. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was chaotic.
It's a good state. It's a good state for truckers in general. You can get a lot of miles done there and still not even get out of the state. So you can do plenty of miles with your regional long haul. But even in flatbed,
I'm not surprised.
Even in flatbed, Ryan, flatbed volumes are up 36% week over week last week. But still a lot of trucks in the market. Rates didn't move much. That didn't move the needle. Some of the big lanes are, Dallas to Houston's paying a little bit more than it has done historically. It's about $100 a load more last week, but that's because rates are dropping on the northbound lane. So carriers are looking to to balance. But I think Houston has been one of those markets that's really surprised me. Other than nearshoring, more manufacturing activity going to Mexico, and obviously Southeast Asian ports. As companies move away from China, you'll see more volume compared to historical volumes come across there. But we're also seeing a lot more coming to the Gulf Coast also. So you're seeing Houston and Mobile being big growth markets. So I think it just looks like Texas is going to be a very strong market for flatbed, dry van carriers. Always been a strong market for reefer carriers because of all the Central American plantains that come in there into some of those big, I think is it Dole Fresh? You've got a massive distribution facility there.
And I think they have the one in New Jersey as well for the finished goods.
Yeah, and San Diego. That's pretty much all you see in San Diego is Dole Fresh. Yep.
I think it reminds me of having a Dole Whip. Probably my favorite part of going to Disneyland. Having one of those. Just want to ask you both because, like we said, we gear the show towards everybody, and a lot of new people do watch. For Houston specifically, I kind of want to dive a little bit deep. For both Jeff and Dean, what specifically comes out there? What's big out there, like in terms of commodities and basically niches? Like what comes out of Houston or goes into Houston for the most part?
A lot of pipe. I can tell you that. A lot of for the drilling aspects. I mean, that's like a major market going out of southern Texas up into Canada, into all the regions up there, even into
energy
and stuff. What's that?
A lot of energy, like wind energy, drill pipe casing. Yep, absolutely. It's a huge flatbed market.
Huge.
I did a lot of flatbed there. Sandale was a customer I worked. They did like PVC piping, and we just do so much with them out of that Houston location. And I want to switch things up a little bit because we kind of want to get to the theme. We've been doing, Dean, this week we've been doing prospecting. So Monday we did cold calling. Tuesday we did emails, and today being Wednesday, I want to get your perspective because you've had that perspective of being a driver as well. Jeff and I, we talked to a lot of drivers who are becoming brokers. That's kind of like the next path in their life. They have a competitive advantage. They get to see what's kind of going on there. Any kind of tips or any kind of stories you can share with our audience where, hey, you were with a driver and you went to like a dock or you went to a truck stop and just had that conversation about like potential customers in the area that wasn't for who you were working with?
Yeah, the one thing that resonates with me over multiple years is your reputation's only as good as the last crappy load. right? So it and DAT, we deal with this all the time, right? Because we're sort of dealing with intermediaries and third parties. Our reputation is contingent upon customer service levels that are largely out of our control. But because we're so big, you often get you get labeled with that reputation. So the one thing that carriers always talk about, and I'll be very quick to tell you about how bad that last load was. They rarely talk about how good the majority of loads are. So I would say, as we've said on the show, never sugarcoat the bitter pill. Be completely transparent with your carriers. I will take a terrible load if you're upfront and honest with me, because what I really can't handle is the surprises.
Right.
You don't want to surprise a carrier when you've got them on the dock. You don't want to. Oh, I forgot to tell you it was a 2-day transit and a 5 drop. No.
No, they always do that after the fact, and then you red flag them as a carrier.
So I think if you're looking to any carriers will know that. I think that's their distinct advantage, is they know what all the pitfalls are, and they know how to talk to carriers. So I would expect they would be very forthcoming with that, because you can always, if it's a bad load for whatever reason, you've also got to help the carrier find that next load that might be a little bit better. So do a little bit more legwork and make sure you find some other options for them. But so that's the message I would say that resonates mostly, is no surprises. Surprises are really good things for carriers, and your reputation will hang upon that last bad surprise.
Yeah, be honest and truthful, as we're both kind of knowing it, because
I've
been in a situation. Double transparency, I like that, because nobody wants to pay that tono fee anyways. You go there and you find out that you got to get floor loaded, so you got to drop your trailer and wait like another 8 hours. No, just be completely transparent and open and honest.
Drivers are creatures of habit. Like we are. I'll put my driver hat on. We are creatures of habit. What we love to do more than anything is know what I'm doing for the rest of the week. Like, no surprises. I plan my week out. I know where I got to be, when I got to be. The worst thing you can do is upset that plan. And drivers will, if you work with them on giving them all of the predictability in their entire work week, they'll do whatever they can to make that happen for you. And the reverse is true if you don't do that.
Yes, I agree 100%. Yep.
Also going to talk about here. Anything to? I know that like you said, you were last week. You're busy doing a conference. Anything else you got coming up for the near future?
Yeah, I think the big event that affects everybody in trucking is the ACT Research. It's the 68th ACT Research Conference in Columbus, Indiana. In Columbus, in February 21st to 23rd. So ACT Research are a partner of DAT. They're the number one company when it comes to new truck and trailer orders and used truck prices. So it'll be a very good event attended by all the OEMs. If you're interested in the supply side of our industry, it's one of those must-attend events coming up in the next 4 weeks. So that's something I'd keep on everyone's calendar. If you can get to the Midwest, that'll be a good event.
Yeah, it's good to kind of keep eyes on those things. And what about yourself, Jeff? If there's certain things that you kind of got marked on your calendar that you're like, okay, this, if you want to be a true professional of what you do, you got to come to this, either whether it be a webinar or a conference or anything like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you have something that's a big startup, you're talking about the carriers and coordinate the activities, being transparent and letting them know. Well, depending upon the size of a shipper, you want to bring them into the fold. And what do I mean by that is bring in their sales rep so they can ramp up and have a great understanding, either a new product line, a new lane, whatever it might be, so that there's no surprises. And what I try to do is I like to get the same drivers going to the same location. If you can get them on a nice rotation and they get to know the shipper, the dock supervisor, everything, they build that long-lasting relationship. And they actually look forward to meeting each other and seeing each other, because they know how each other operates and what you're looking for. So there's a lot of, instead of having a tremendous amount of downtime with no productivity, they start moving a lot faster because they understand each other. And that's what you try to do in building those relationships, not just with the shipper, but with the shipper, with the carrier. And that all happens with collaboration. And you bring in the sales and operations team. So this way you're like, here's what we're doing in the next 3 months. We're going to need another 3 trailers here. We're going to need another 4 over here. And then there's no surprises, and that's how you build those long-term business relationships by
It's
keeping
great
each
advice.
other informed. You have to keep them informed, and
It's
even if
wonderful.
there's a process change, let them know. Don't be a
Right.
surprise. Do not
Right.
let them be a surprise. Yep, and have those carrier roundtables like every quarter. We used to have it like every 3 months, or if a problem came up, of course we would have it sooner. But we would never discuss rates or accessorials or anything. That was totally irrelevant. It was about the process, what we are doing, how are we doing it, what doors we're changing. This is your spot, and so forth. And then on the reverse side of that, the carriers would tell us about the changes they're doing to improve service and what they're doing operationally. So this way, everybody's, they're turning at the same speed. No
Yep.
surprises. This is who you need to contact. We have a new manager in place. We have this, that. Those are all those things that you must do. I mean, I'm serious when I say this. Must do, because you will be embedded in their operation for a very, very long time if you follow those steps. For sure.
Good advice. Great advice. Yep.
That's awesome. And I feel like there's no better way to end the show today. As you know, we're coming up with amazing topics, and that's what we're loving, right? With about this Wednesday shows is that, hey, people can come here, they can get the data, they can go there and have those conversations with their customers, but there's other tangible advice that we're giving here as well.
Right.
So,
Right.
Dean, thank you again. It's always a pleasure to have you on with us.
Thank you,
It
guys.
truly is.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's always
Thanks,
lovely.
Dean.
Jeff,
you.
always a
Enjoy the
pleasure,
rest of
brother.
your week.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your week. We're looking forward to having you on next week. And for everybody, if you found value in this, please send this to somebody. Like, comment, subscribe. Catch us at the replay at 12 and 3 p.m. Eastern Time on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Tomorrow, we'll be diving in deep about social selling for prospecting. That'll be our round 3 with Jeff and I as we get into the ring. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Have yourself an amazing day. Take care.